An autumn breeze carried the fresh scent of water as Isaac Turner walked across the deck. He looked over the railing at the ship sailing down the Detroit River. There was a chill in the air, and he thought about going below deck to get his jacket, but decided to check on the young man first. He looked around the 700-foot cargo ship and tried to find his charge. But before he saw Jimmy, something else caught his eye and brought a smile to his lips. There on the shore of Belle Isle, the Pearl in the center of the river, between Detroit, Michigan, USA, and Windsor, Ontario, Canada, he saw them. A group of small children were waving frantically at a passing ship. The group of smiling little faces brought a smile to Isaac's weather-beaten face as he watched them. He knew that at that moment, every one of those children wanted to be on that ship. Tomorrow, their thoughts would return to music, monsters, and video games. But in that brief moment as the ship sailed by, they were completely focused on it. That was the beauty of children. Isaac knew this from his own experience as he had 2 children of his own. They put their heart and soul into everything they did. If only adults could do the same. "Hey, Ike, who you waving at?" Jimmy asked, coming up behind Isaac. "Just a bunch of kids on the beach," Isaac replied. "Why?" Jimmy asked. "I probably made their day just by being polite," Isaac replied. "Besides, you reap what you sow. You never know. Maybe one of those kids will grow up to be our next assistant or owner. I always try to treat people the way I would like to be treated. All the bad things you do usually come back to you. The good things come back too." Jimmy nodded and shivered in the wind. It was definitely chilly today, even for late October in Michigan. But at least it wasn't snowing. Michigan was a state where all 4 seasons were distinct. The weather in the state was also subject to sudden and severe changes. There is an old saying in Michigan, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes and it will change. The ship on which they both worked as deckhands was called the Bill Maitland. Its identification and registration number was DQS-1. The ship was 729 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 38 feet high. It carried iron ore to ports in Michigan and Wisconsin. At the moment, there were about 26,000 tons of pellets in its hold, which would soon be used to manufacture cars and trucks. "Damn, it's cold in here," Jimmy muttered. This was his 3rd voyage on this ship, and he was starting to get used to it. Sometimes he liked to show off his knowledge of the ship so that the older sailors wouldn't treat him like a rookie. "If I didn't know better, I'd swear that intelligence—" Isaac interrupted Jimmy, covering his mouth with his huge hand so quickly that Jimmy thought he had swallowed the rest of his sentence. "Shut up, kid," Isaac hissed viciously. "Never mention Hira near the lakes, especially not in October and November. Do you understand me?" Isaac stared at Jimmy so intently that he became frightened. Jimmy knew that Isaac was big and strong enough to tear him in half without a second thought. Nevertheless, Isaac was the kindest and gentlest person Jimmy had ever met. It would take either a miracle or something very serious to make his friend angry. Jimmy nodded, letting Isaac know that he understood completely. Jimmy knew that sailors, or as they were now called mariners, because very few ships sailed the seas these days, were very superstitious. On the Great Lakes, these superstitions seemed to be even stronger. But despite all the technological advances and modern equipment, Jimmy didn't expect anyone to really believe in all those old tales. Perhaps it was just a generational difference. There was more than just a generation gap between 50-year-old Ike and 24-year-old Jimmy. They had almost no shared life experiences that could bring them closer together. In fact, the only thing they had in common was that they were both sailors on the DQS-1. Otherwise, their lives were very different. While Jimmy met a new woman in every port, his friend Isaac had been married to the same woman, Tina, longer than Jimmy had been alive. Their relationship was often turbulent, and Jimmy had to calm Isaac down on more than one occasion. Almost everyone on the ship knew about the constant quarrels between Isaac and his wife. This was one of the reasons Jimmy didn't want to settle down until he went to sea. It was too difficult to maintain a stable relationship when he was away from home for weeks at a time. Ike claimed that they stayed together because they loved each other. But Jimmy, listening to the couple's almost constant quarrels, often wondered what love had to do with it. In addition, Ike still believed in many superstitious omens that had long been part of maritime folklore. Jimmy, on the other hand, was neither religious nor superstitious. He didn't believe in anything he couldn't see, feel, or taste. Even most of the things he had heard about could be explained scientifically. One of his favorite shows, which he watched whenever he could on the internet, was Ghost Hunters, which showed that many things people considered supernatural were actually very easily explained. So Jimmy just laughed to himself at how his friend was afraid that Jimmy would mention a witch. Witch, Jimmy thought. Witch? To hell with witches, Jimmy muttered under his breath as Isaac walked away. Next chapter. Although Jimmy's words were almost inaudible to the human ear, they were reflected in the river and became part of it. Becoming part of the river, they became part of Lake Huron, into which it flowed. Jimmy's words carried across the St. Marius River and the Sioux Locks into Lake Superior. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. Both Longfellow and Gordon Lightfoot wrote about Gitchagummy, which means big water. Whatever you call it, Lake Superior is huge and intimidating. There are places deep in the lake where the water does not freeze for most of the year. Superstitious locals believed that the lake and its sisters were living beings with souls and personalities. There were all kinds of legends about the lakes and their abilities. In Jimmy's case, the problem wasn't the spirit of the 10,000-year-old lake. The problem was something much younger, but at the same time much older. Deep in the center of the lake, in one of its coldest parts, called the Ice Palace, Jimmy's words gently touched the body. One touch of the water filled with words was enough. The creature hissed, and eyes of an eerie icy blue color opened. A thin arm waved, and the wind at the top of the lake rose, creating a whirlpool that cut deep into the lake. The rapid current did not go unnoticed by the Supreme One herself. In a voice as deep and watery as the ocean, the Supreme One said, "Sleep, little sister. Your time has not yet come." In response, the wind howled across the lake, and the whirlpool cleared a path for her body to the surface of the water. "Something is calling me, and I must answer." The wind grew stronger until her exhausted but bloated body broke through the surface and floated above the water. There was a clap of thunder, and lightning struck the water. The gusts of wind reached hurricane force and formed a very dense arc around the body. The suction and friction of the wind sucked all the water out of the body. The lake water acted as a preservative, keeping the body fresh. When the body dried, the wind rushed inside. The body became the abode of the wind's consciousness. In a very strange way, the body became a vessel for the wind. It allowed the wind to interact with beings and entities on the earthly plane, while remaining attached to the incorporeal plane where she and her cousins, the lake spirits, existed. The wind and the lakes could always influence people, places, and things on both planes, but they knew neither the results nor the motives of their actions on this plane. Her sister, the Supreme, often sank ships and killed many without realizing it. The body, whose consciousness now belonged to the wind, smiled at this thought. She shook her head vigorously, so vigorously that if she were still human, her neck would have broken. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural fire and determination. The thoughts that belonged to the original consciousness of this body still swirled in her head. This person had been dead for over 30 years by human standards. She wondered why this person's thoughts, memories, and feelings still sometimes haunted her. But it didn't matter, she thought. She was no longer Sue Ellen Hopper. It was surprising that she still remembered this man's name. It was November, and there were people in the yard, those fragile, useless little creatures, who called her the November Witch. They knew her only for the storms she brought with her when she woke up every year. They knew so little. For 31 years, she had had her purpose among them. Amazingly, no one had figured it out yet. Looking around, Noembrina felt that she was being called to the shore. The call came from the vicinity of Gitchagummy, from where the waters of Huron lapped. She felt this call very keenly, and what it promised. But first she needed to eat. To hell with the witch, damn it. Next chapter. Clifford Darden slid out from under the back seat of his 2008 Mustang GT. He had been working on the car's suspension. He needed stiffer upper and lower control arms so that the rear of the pony car wouldn't bounce every time it hit a bump or pothole. The car had tremendous power, but getting it out on the road was no easy task. He wondered why Ford still refused to put independent rear suspension on the car. Hell, most cars already had limited-slip rear differentials, so why the hell do they still use a rear axle, which is basically a I-beam with a wheel on each end? He didn't care. He loved his car so much that a few flaws in its design seemed more like quirks than flaws. Cliff didn't know anyone who was perfect. What made him get out from under the car was the sound of another car pulling up near the garage. He realized it was probably his wife, Ramona. He wiped his hands and entered the house just as an attractive blonde ran up the stairs and headed straight for the bathroom adjoining their bedroom. She had been doing this a lot lately. It seemed like she had to take a shower every night as soon as she got home. He wondered what she did at her secretarial job that was so stressful that she needed to take a shower as soon as she got home. He hadn't agreed to that when he married her. He didn't understand why she needed to work at all. His six-figure salary was more than enough for both of them. Ramona's job didn't pay her enough to pay for the clothes he bought her for work. He had convinced her several times that it would be better for them financially if she quit. The cost of the clothes she needed for work, in addition to her regular clothes, plus the wear and tear on her car and gas. All of this far exceeded her earnings. Add to that the lunches she ate every day at her favorite restaurant, and it turned out that her job was costing them money. He respected her desire to work and maintain the appearance of financial independence, but it was beyond reasonable. They had been married for just under 2 years and were already starting to fall apart in the bedroom. Cliff loved Ramona. As soon as he saw her, he fell in love. His heart was at her feet, and she could do whatever she wanted with him. Cliff wasn't a troll, but he wasn't Romeo either. He expected her to crush his heart and walk away laughing. At least, he expected her to politely and gently reject him in search of some guy she could sing with. He was more than pleasantly surprised when she responded to his interest and affection with what seemed like mutual feelings. Their romance was short but intense. They got engaged after 3 months, married after 6, and were ready to divorce 2 years later. It was very painful. Lately, Cliff had been getting more affection from his car than from Ramona. A few more days and he would be ready to meet her. One way or another, it had to end. Of course, he suspected she was cheating on him. He did everything you usually do in such cases, including hiring a detective. The detective was supposed to report back to him in a few days, but then what? What would he do if it turned out she was cheating on him? A macho man would have done this. He would have thrown that bitch out on the street. Thrown her out on the street? Maybe he should have been even more macho and beaten her and those she was cheating on him with. That's what John Wayne would have done. But the problem was that he wasn't John Wayne. Cliff couldn't stand other people's stupidity, but that was the reality of life. He loved Ramona so much that he couldn't imagine life without her, even after only 2 years. He was torn apart, but he knew that in the end, his only hope was to meet her face to face and trick her into agreeing to leave the other man. Spending his nights in Ramona's arms, even if she claimed she was too tired for anything else, was still better than being alone, and certainly better than being with someone else. On the one hand, he wanted Ramona to love him as much as he loved her, but on the other, he wished with all his heart that he had never met her. Either way, it would all be over soon. He shrugged and went back to working on the car. Next chapter. She remembered the 4 hours she had spent that morning in a motel on the other side of town with 3 strange men. She had to wash herself until she was sparkling clean so that Cliff wouldn't suspect anything. The only advantage Cliff had was his house. It was located in a small gated community. It was the perfect place to hide after the insurance scam she had almost gotten caught in shortly before they met. Now, 2 years later, no one was looking for her, and she was going to get access to Cliff's accounts to squeeze every last penny out of him. When she left him in a few days, she would be able to take almost $1 million in cash and investments to ease her way into her next scam. What she liked most about Cliff was that he was damn reliable. With him, she realized that the insurance scams and thefts she used to make money were too dangerous and didn't bring in enough profit. What she pulled off with him was too good to be true. Just find a rich simpleton, make him fall in love with her, marry him, live with him for a while, and then leave him penniless. It was all too easy. Besides, even though she didn't love him, she had feelings for him. And she didn't want him to suffer for nothing. Ramona wasn't capable of love in the way most people understand it. That's why Cliff was the closest person to her. She treated Cliff the way most people treat their pets. "Cliff," she called to him. She looked around the house and didn't see him. Where the hell was he? Looking around the house, she realized she was going to miss this place. Cliff had spent money and time to make her feel comfortable in the huge ranch. She really felt at home here. She had never had a home before, at least not one of her own. She looked at the photos scattered across the tables and walls. There were many photos of her and Cliff in different parts of the world. They looked truly happy. Only she knew that their shared memories were just part of her attempt to win his trust. She heard a soft knock coming from the kitchen and knew where he was. He was in the garage with his second wife. She wondered what he would choose, her or the car, if he had to choose. "Cliff," she called, opening the door separating the garage from the house. He looked up from the mechanical device he was working on under the car, and she saw the sadness in his eyes. He knew. Instincts honed by years of deception told her unequivocally that her target was watching her. She didn't know exactly how much he knew, but he knew something, and they didn't have long to live. "Hi, honey. I've been thinking about you all day," she cooed. "It's been several days since we—" "I'm a little tired," he said, looking at his car. Now she knew that he knew. Jealousy flashed across his face. He suspected she was teasing him. Perhaps he would ask someone to follow her. If they watched too closely, they might discover something. Tonight, she would have to run. But at this early stage, she couldn't take all the money. She would have to settle for a few $100,000. Fortunately, her backup guy would be home tonight. He was a sailor and might be able to get her out if she insisted. She had already had a good time with him on that huge ship he wasn't supposed to take her on. "But baby, you don't want to," she began. She really wanted to save him if possible. Her best chance of getting all the money was to convince him to hold out for a few more weeks. To be honest, she didn't want to admit it, but she wasn't really ready for her relationship with Cliff to end. Yes, he was a fool, but he loved her unconditionally. She had never had that before. She would probably miss him more than she missed home. She put on a look of regret and pain, as if he had hurt her deeply. Her act was so convincing that he began to give in. She almost laughed. And then it happened. His cell phone rang. He looked at her apologetically and said, "I have to take this." Ramona knew Cliff like the back of her hand. She had trained him so well that he usually told her everything. If he had a business call, he didn't hesitate to discuss it in her presence. But he didn't want to take this call in front of her. It could only mean one of two things. The first was that it was something he didn't want her to know about. The second was that it concerned her directly. Of course, it could have been a surprise he was planning for her, but it was better to err on the side of caution. She had to assume that he knew about her, and that this call did not bode well. She tiptoed over to him when he turned away from her and hung up the phone. She kissed him lightly on the cheek and left the room. She pretended to close the door quietly behind her, then dropped the frying pan on the kitchen floor. The sound echoed throughout the house. She knew he would think she was cooking something to eat. Then she quickly returned to the half-closed door and listened. She could hear him talking about photos and videos. She couldn't make out the whole conversation, but when she heard his version, she knew her intuition had been right. She went back to the kitchen and made herself a sandwich. When Cliff came over, she smiled and asked if he wanted something to eat. "Maybe when I get back," he replied. "I need to talk to you too, okay?" She nodded and smiled. "I love talking to you, sweetie," she said. "I'll be waiting." Her smile was so bright, and the way she looked at him told him she would do anything for him. He left the house. He got into his Mustang and roared out of the garage. Damn, she wished he hadn't taken that car. She would have stolen that one without a second thought. Before he even reached the end of the block, she was already getting dressed and grabbed several of his credit cards, which she hid. Like many people, he used the same PIN for all his cards. That made it easier for her to empty them. She hid the cards in her purse and then opened the safe. He usually kept between $10,000 and $20,000 in cash there for a rainy day. He also had several easily cashed certificates of deposit. She used all her credit cards to replenish the account and then cash the certificates of deposit in a nearby town. In the end, she had about $100,000. It wasn't a small amount, but she didn't have access to large bank accounts yet. She planned to pretend she was buying him a very expensive car for his birthday. She had already spoken to the man who managed their bank accounts. She was going to make this idiot think she was buying Cliff a Ferrari. That way, she would kill two birds with one stone. The idiot at the bank would think he was more attractive to her than he really was or could ever be. He might even think she would give him something extra for his help. On the other hand, poor stupid Cliff might think she was giving him something to eat. He might think she didn't know she'd have to pay him back. By the time it came time to pay for the car, she'd be long gone. Well, next time, next sucker, she thought. She would really miss him. He truly loved her, and she wasn't ready for a serious relationship yet. But she would get over it. They both would. And in a way, she had done him a favor. She had taught him a very important lesson. He realized that he had to be much more careful with both his money and his heart. Next chapter. Cliff met with his private investigator, Frederick Sanford. "Have a seat, Mr. Darden," Sanford said. Fred Sanford was an old, world-weary veteran who had gone into the detective business after leaving the army. Over the years, he had seen everything there was to see. He had seen men who cheated on their wives so often that chasing other women was like buying a hamburger. He had also seen men who loved their cheating wives so much that even when they caught them in the act, they gave them chance after chance until it turned into a game of don't ask, don't tell. He was sure Darden would be one of those guys. The guy loved that bitch so much it was crazy, but who wouldn't? It wasn't particularly pleasant to tell this guy that the woman he loved was sleeping around with everyone. "Mr. Darden, I have some bad news for you," Sanford said. He spoke in a professional, sad voice because that made clients think he really felt for them. In fact, clients paid more when they thought he was sad for them. "Your wife is definitely playing games with you, but it's good that it's not just one specific man. That would be much worse," Sanford said. "Okay, I'm confused," Cliff said. "Wouldn't it be better if it was just one man?" "Of course not. Much worse," Sanford said. "If she's fooling around with one man all the time, it means she has some feelings for him. She may love him or even be in love with him. Things like that are easy to fix. You could even save your marriage. In that case, maybe she's just more attractive than you. And instead of hurting your feelings, she's just going out to get what she needs and then coming home to you. When you're together, how does she treat you?" Sanford asked. "Well, she treats me well," Cliff replied. He was beginning to realize that things weren't what he had thought they were. Maybe it wasn't so clear-cut. "She just lights up when I walk into the room." "Well, there you have it," Sanford said. "Take this folder. Go home and show her the photos and videos. Scare the hell out of her. Make her think you want a divorce, and get a therapist to help you work through it." Cliff's mood improved considerably as he headed home. Next chapter. Jimmy lay down on his bunk to take a nap after helping the other sailors unload most of the cargo. It was hard physical work, very tiring. He had time for a quick nap before calling Melissa, his woman in the city. She was a few years older than him, but so beautiful that it didn't matter. Jimmy also knew she was married, but that didn't bother him either. Despite the presence of a large crane to lift most of the cargo, Jimmy and the other deckhands and dock workers worked for hours doing the grueling work of unloading the ship. They moved 13,000 tons of pellets and loaded almost as many raw castings. Both the castings and the remaining pellets would be shipped to Wisconsin. They would leave for Wisconsin in the morning, so Jimmy would only be able to see Melissa for one night. On the way back, he would stop for 3 days, and then maybe they would have a real date. But tonight was just for fun. "Jimmy, there's a girl waiting for you," Carl Jones called out. Carl was another sailor. He had been on the ship only a few weeks longer than Jimmy. Carl had a reputation as a suck-up. Most of the crew had decided he wasn't such a bad guy, as long as you didn't trust him with anything you didn't want to lose. Besides, Carl seemed willing to break any rule if he thought he could get away with it. "Want me to bring her to your cabin?" Carl asked. "Hell no," Jimmy replied. "The captain will kill us both." "The old man's ashore. What he doesn't know won't hurt him," Carl muttered. "All right, bring her," Jimmy yawned. 10 minutes later, Ramona, whom Jimmy knew as Melissa, was having a good time with Jimmy. She considered him the best lover she had ever had. He sincerely believed that she missed him so much that she waited for him at the marina when she needed him to drive her to Wisconsin that night or early the next morning. She was sure that the stolen money would make the police and his private investigator look for Cliff. And although Cliff could afford to lose the money if she was caught, such a sum would send her to prison for a very long time. She immediately noticed that he seemed to be pulling away from her. She realized right away that, unlike Cliff, Jimmy didn't want to be close to her. He had had his fill and no longer needed her. This put her in a difficult position. She needed to hide and leave town. She should have waited until they were further away from the marina. Now she was in his power, and she had nothing to bargain with except the promise of more of what he already had. She realized she had been very foolish. She had stolen from a man who loved her with all his heart and soul, and what had she gotten in return? A little money. He had always given her as much as she wanted. Cliff was handsome, kind, and rich. What more could she want? She would soon be 30. She was getting too old for this running around and hiding from the law. Wasn't it time for her to settle down and get everything that the rest of us had? It was too late now, but it was time to find her own life and stop stealing others. Jimmy, I missed you so much, she lied. Jimmy yawned and looked at his watch. I don't want you to be late, baby, he said. Baby, she thought. This bastard probably doesn't even remember what she called him. Funny that she didn't remember either. What's my name, Jimmy? She asked. Um, um, he began. She muttered angrily. Melissa, he muttered quickly. I didn't forget. I just got used to calling you baby. Jimmy, can I stay with you? I don't want us to be apart for so long again, she asked, her voice sounding very innocent and very needy. I'll think about whether I can do that, he said. Oh, you have to be very quiet and careful because I could get into serious trouble if we get caught. I don't know how you'll be able to wash or even go to the bathroom. Don't worry about that, Jimmy, she purred. I just want to be with you, okay? Ramona planned to do what she always did. A ship full of men was no problem. Even if the ship sailed slowly, they would reach Wisconsin in less than 3 days. So all she needed was a chance and a place to hide. Jimmy had his own plans too. Besides, her husband was rich. If he was nice to her, maybe she could get him a job. Unlike Ike, Jimmy wasn't going to spend his whole life loading and unloading that ship. Okay, baby, let's give it a try. Go get your things and bring them here. Meet me in 3 hours at the same place where you were waiting for me earlier, he said. You won't regret it, Jimmy, she said. 3 hours was just what she needed. She had already been to the bank and transferred as much money as she could from Cliff's account. Now all she had to do was go to as many ATMs as possible until she reached her limit. Adding her cash and certificates of deposit, she found herself in a very good position. However, deep down, one thought kept nagging at her. She was very determined and at the same time very persistent. You don't have to do this. He loves you very much. He'll forgive you and you'll be happy. She dismissed the thought. It was incomprehensible to her. She had spent most of her life on the run, stealing and deceiving people, so why change now? She wasn't sure she knew how to live any other way. Next chapter. Jimmy walked into a dirty little bar on the riverbank called Sailor's Hands. Looking around the room, he saw several guys playing pool, a few more throwing darts, and a few more gathered in front of a beat-up TV watching a Red Wings game. He was surprised that Detroit was such a sports town. Even in New York or any city in California, there wasn't as much variety in sports teams as there was in the Motor City. The Red Wings were arguably the best team in the NHL. The Tigers were battling the Rangers in the ALCS for a spot in the World Series. The Lions started the year with an incredible 4-0 record. They had won 8 straight games in the regular season since last year, and 12 straight if you counted the preseason games. That weekend, there were soccer games between Michigan and Michigan State. Everywhere you looked, there were great sporting events going on. Only the Pistons were terrible. Sailor's Arms was not a bar for the elite. The wood was old, the furniture was beat up, the floors were scratched, and the establishment did not serve food, only drinks and snacks. Most of the patrons were sailors working on the Great Lakes. None of the patrons dressed up because women rarely visited the place. And if they did, it was usually because they were lost or trying to drag their drunk husbands home. But even in these 2 cases, they left as quickly as they could. It was as if they felt they didn't belong there. Perhaps that's why it was so strange when a strong gust of wind blew the door open, leaving its frame in the doorway, with the moon shining behind it. The men at the bar sighed amiably, and a quiet murmur passed through the room. When she headed for the bar, the men at the tables leaned toward her and some left when she disappeared into the doorway. Ignoring her, everyone in the room fixed their eyes on her. Outside, the wind howled, and someone tried to close the door. Jimmy looked at her. He didn't look away or try to hide, just stared right at her. She looked very good, he thought. Her long hair was chestnut brown and combed to the side, as if she had just been caught in the rain. But the evening was clear. She had probably been washing a boat, a car, or something like that. She was extremely thin. But there was something crazy in her eyes, he thought. He had never met a very thin woman before. The thin woman approached Jimmy. She tilted her head to one side and looked at him strangely. Then she smiled at him. Her clothes looked worn. She seemed very old-fashioned. Even her long hairstyle seemed outdated, at least 20 or 30 years old, if not more. She was either very poor, a prostitute, or both. Now Jimmy had a game he could play. He had a new game. He smiled broadly back at her. He noticed that some of the men around him crossed themselves. It never ceased to amaze him how superstitious most sailors were. This omen probably had something to do with the women in the sailors' bar. There was another omen connected with women on board the ship, but he had entertained Melissa several times on the Maitland, and nothing bad had happened. To hell with superstition. He noticed that what he had taken for some kind of necklace was actually several strands of underwater plants growing in the lakes that were wrapped around her neck. It was a little strange. She must have been one of those greenies who deluded themselves into thinking they were going to save the planet. He reached out, took her hand, and pulled her toward the table. He flinched slightly when she followed him. Her hand was cold as ice, and she smelled strange. It smelled devilishly familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. "So what brought you here, baby?" he asked. "You," she replied. Jimmy smiled even wider. Like fishing in a bucket, he thought. Less than 10 minutes later, she took him by the hand and led him outside. She didn't mention a price, but they both knew why they were leaving. As they tried to close the door to keep the wind out, Jimmy thought he heard someone say something about a witch. He laughed again at their silly superstitions. "Where are we going, baby?" he asked. She squeezed his hand like a vice. It even hurt a little. Just a few minutes ago, the river had been calm, but now the water seemed to be churning as if a storm were approaching. It was funny that when he looked down the river in both directions, the water seemed to become calmer as he moved away. It seemed as if a storm or mini-storm was following him. He had heard of strange local weather phenomena and pocket storms, but he never expected to see anything like this. She pointed to a small boat bobbing on the waves. It was barely holding onto a small dock used by local fishermen who didn't have boats. "There's no way I'm getting in that tiny boat in such rough water," he said. "Are you afraid?" she asked, smiling at him. "No, I just have a good head on my shoulders," he replied. She smiled at him again as if she liked the comparison. As she smiled, the weather calmed down almost instantly. The river barely rippled, and the wind became much weaker and gentler, almost a warm breeze. "That was just a squall," she said. "They happen sometimes in the fall. But you're a professional sailor. You've probably heard of them. Prouda?" "Sure, I've heard of them," Jimmy lied. "I guess if you're afraid to get in the boat, we'll have to call it off," she said. "Let's run to the boat," he shouted. When Jimmy looked at the boat, a chill ran down his spine. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't far from it. It was just a feeling of unease, as if something was telling him he shouldn't do this. It disappeared when he saw the woman stretched out on the bow of the small boat. The strangest thing was that Jimmy hadn't seen her get into the boat. He had been walking slightly behind her, and then she just appeared in the boat. It was as if the wind had carried her there. No, that was impossible. If he kept this up, he would end up like those old men with their lake legends. Jimmy climbed down from the small pier into the boat and looked into the face of his future lover. Jimmy moved closer to her in the boat. He noticed that she was smiling too broadly even. "Jimmy," she said, "I like you." It was strange. He didn't remember telling her his name, but he must have said it. "I wanted you before I even saw you," she said. Jimmy laughed out loud. He was the one who usually said corny things to women. Another strange thing was that her voice had changed. "How could you want me without even seeing me?" he asked. The feeling he had dismissed as silly superstition returned with renewed force. His own voice sounded different than usual, too. Perhaps there was some strange atmospheric phenomenon at work that was changing both their voices. Jimmy looked around and noticed that the small boat was far from the shore of the busy river. If this had happened during the day, they could have easily called for help. But at night, at this time of year, they could freeze to death. Her voice distracted him from these thoughts. Besides, Jimmy suddenly felt colder. The wind picked up and the waves grew higher again. It seemed as if the wind was rippling the water. "Those are your words," the woman said. "Your words woke me up." Today was only the 30th day of October. I shouldn't have interrupted my sleep for almost 2 of your 7-day periods. What do you call them? Weeks, that's all. I should have slept for 2 more weeks. Now I'll have to pay for it. It's like those legends you feed on, Jimmy. That damn song. Oh, I hate that damn song. It reminds me of how I became what you see now. Jimmy began to move away from her as she spoke. He noticed that the light he saw in her eyes was not a reflection of the moonlight. The light was coming from inside her eyes. Something strange was happening. All he could do was hope that she would keep talking until someone noticed the small boat. At night, this place was full of river patrols and Coast Guard ships. He just needed time. He was a good swimmer, and as soon as he saw the boat, he would be able to swim to it. "What song is that?" Jimmy asked loudly. He was surprised at how loud his voice was. Although he was ready to wet himself with fear, he looked into her eyes and spoke to her. "What legends are you talking about?" he asked. "I hate all those old legends and stuff." "Oh, I don't remember the names of the songs," she said. Her voice sounded even more like the wind. "My sisters and I have been around for over 10,000 years. Many songs have been written about lakes and storms. But this song really tells the whole story. It made me take this body just over 30 years ago." Maybe it was the wind playing tricks on him, but Jimmy thought he heard a slow, mournful melody coming from somewhere. He also thought it was a man singing. He could barely make out the words. It was one of those old sad songs that play on old radio stations and that you listen to until they depress you and ruin your whole day. They say the lake never gives up its dead when the November storms come early. Jimmy was sure he had heard that song before. He had never paid any attention to it and didn't even know who sang it. But now it seemed like the most important song in his whole damn life. He quickly tried to change the subject. "But it wasn't the song that made you want me, was it?" he asked. Jimmy realized that the conversation had taken a different turn. He sensed that it was now a matter of survival. The waves on the river were so big that there were only a few boats left. He couldn't understand it because just a few minutes ago, the river had been calm. "No, Jimmy," she whispered and smiled at him. "It was your wonderful romantic words that woke me up and made me look for you." "What did I say?" Jimmy asked. "Whatever it was, I'm sorry. I take it back. I didn't mean it. I didn't want any of this. Oh, please, Jesus, Jesus, help me." The woman in front of the boat just laughed. God is resting, Jimmy. It's just us here now." The wind carried more and more strange sounds to Jimmy's ears. The same sad song was still playing, as if it were meant just for him. Does anyone know where God's love goes when the waves turn minutes into hours? "Please give me a chance," Jimmy shouted. His words were lost, drowned out by the wind, but he knew she could hear him. "What did I do? What did I say to wake you up?" "Oh, you remember, Jimmy," she said as the wind grew even stronger. "You remember how you called me? You said it over and over again. Damn the witch." Jimmy knew his life was over. The woman's face took on a completely different expression. There was something very ancient about it, predating all other religions in this area. She was part of the wind. In fact, she was the wind. The woman in the boat was a November witch. Jimmy felt himself being lifted high above the boat. He hung in the air, held up by the wind. The wind whipped up the water and even the sand on the riverbank. The sand flew so fast that it scraped the skin off Jimmy's body. He screamed as scars and cuts appeared on all exposed parts of his body. "Why are you screaming, Jimmy?" she asked. Her exclamation frightened him more than he realized at the moment. "Because it hurts like hell," he replied. "Try getting your body sprayed with sand by a crazy bitch. I'd rather drown." Even after saying that, Jimmy realized he had made a mistake. Suddenly, the wind died down, and Jimmy plunged into the icy water. The water immediately made his cuts sting, but it was only a momentary sensation. The water was so cold that he immediately began to freeze. Jimmy tried to swim, but couldn't. Then he felt something grab his ankle underwater. He opened his eyes and tried to look around to see what he was caught on. He gasped in surprise, and the air he had been holding in his lungs rushed out. Jimmy was surprised when he realized that his ankle wasn't caught on anything. The witch had grabbed his ankle and was pulling him to the bottom of the river. As Jimmy began to lose consciousness, he could barely make out the features of the woman holding him underwater. She sat calmly in front of him on a rock at the bottom of the river and watched as life left his frozen body. She watched him die as if she were watching a sitcom on TV. Each new episode may be different, but in the end, you've seen it all before. Jimmy felt his soul leaving his body. He wasn't just dying, he was being reborn. Memories left him even as his body surrendered to the icy cold and lack of oxygen. When his lungs caught fire, he forgot his childhood. When the icy water filled his pores, he forgot his name and his teenage years. It was the most horrible death imaginable. Jimmy could accept death, but wasn't this where he was supposed to see his whole life flash before his eyes? Wasn't this where he was supposed to experience his greatest victories and defeats? He got none of that. He tried with all his might to remember his name as his soul was sucked into the witch. Suddenly, she jerked. She looked around and hissed viciously. The movement was too quick for him to notice, and she headed for the surface and rose above it. Jimmy didn't pay attention to her reaction to whatever was bothering her. Next chapter. A large man stood on the riverbank and shouted. He was dressed from head to toe in black leather. His eyes glinted in the moonlight even as he stared at the turbulent water. Gashgadino Hysis, he shouted again. Come out and talk to me before I banish you. Suddenly, Noah Brina jumped out of the water and hovered in the air, supported by the wind. Seeing the man, she laughed. What do you want, kid? She asked, laughing. I'm very busy. Go back to your home, the man shouted. This is not your lake. Let go of the one you're tormenting and return to your place before I chase you away. Noah Brina laughed and spun around in the air. You cannot chase me away, little shaman. And if you continue to annoy me, I will kill you. Your powers are not as great as those of your ancestors. You are weakened by your contact with Europeans and their descendants. Knowing my name is not enough to banish me. Knowing my name only draws attention to you, and my attention can be deadly. As soon as she said this, Jimmy's body floated to the surface. The man in black noticed the body and looked back at the witch. You're lucky I didn't wake up for him. He was just an appetizer. If you keep bothering me, I'll kill you, shaman. Or maybe I'll tell the other shamans. Where's your proud warhorse? All I see is a cart with a little horse in front. You have no power over me. The big man tried to say something, but the wind howled so loudly that he couldn't find the words. The wind blew so hard that he could barely stand. All he could do was watch as the witch flew away from him, carried by the wind. When she flew away, he ran to the riverbank. The body was close enough for him to grab it and pull it ashore. He pulled the body onto the shore and began to perform CPR. He shouted, but there was no one to shout to. Then he took out his iPhone and called emergency services. He continued to perform CPR until the medics arrived. The police arrived with them. He explained how he had pulled the body out of the water, and they took care of the rest. In his conversation with the police, he said that he had gone out for a drive and parked a few meters from the river to watch the boats go by. When he got closer to the water, he saw the body and pulled it out. None of the police officers or paramedics had ever seen such marks on a body. In addition to being nearly drowned, the body had large wounds that looked like cuts. They took his name and number and said they might have questions for him later. The medics weren't sure if the man would survive. It appeared he had spent too much time without oxygen when he was rescued. Even if he did survive, he would likely have brain damage. John Lake shook his head. Too much was happening. His great-grandfather had been a powerful shaman. His grandfather was a powerful alcoholic, and his father, who knew? He had run away shortly after John was born. John's knowledge of the old customs and rituals was superficial at best. He was no shaman. Hell, he was an engineer. He worked as a quality control inspector at the Ford plant in Hamtramck. He was out of his element. He took off his leather jacket and walked to his car. The pony car, as she called it. His Mustang GT had over 450 horsepower, and the symbol on the dashboard was his totem of power. He would have been happy if any of his half-naked ancestors could have kept up with his speed. Next chapter. Ramona was waiting for Jimmy at the Maitland Pier. It had been over 3 hours since he had asked her to meet him, and she was starting to worry. Cliff must have returned home and noticed her absence. It would be some time before he discovered that she had left. Fortunately, she had so many clothes that the few outfits she had taken with her would not leave a trace in her closet. If she was lucky, he might even think she was angry and had gone to a friend's house until she was ready to talk to him. If she thought that, she could call him and tell him. That would give her a few days to hide. But she had thrown away the cell phone he had bought her, so it couldn't be traced. She had bought a disposable cell phone, but she didn't think calling him from it was a good idea. It wasn't in her best interest to give him the opportunity to track her down. With Cliff's money, if she didn't keep quiet, he would easily find her. Ramona shivered. Damn, the water was cold. She needed to think about what to do if Jimmy double-crossed her. She was sure he would agree to anything she wanted. Most guys did whatever she wanted without question. Maybe she was getting old and losing her appeal. A little voice inside her said, "That's one more reason you shouldn't have left Cliff. He loved you, silly girl. You could have been happy and had everything." She pushed those thoughts away when she saw the light of a lighter on the deck of a large ship. "Hey, sailor," she called. When he looked in her direction, Ramona saw that it was the same guy who had told Jimmy she was waiting for him. He looked at her, waved, took a drag on his cigarette and headed for the ladder. He climbed down the aluminum structure and in a few seconds was standing next to her. "Damn, it's cold," he began and immediately faltered. "Why are you just standing there?" Ramona smiled at him, and Carl felt the blood rush to his head. "Oh, you're waiting for Jimmy again," he said. "He should be back any minute. We're leaving at sunrise, but you guys will have plenty of time to, well, you know." He looked at Ramona again. She was really beautiful. "Hey, I probably shouldn't do this, but would you like to wait for him on Jimmy's bunk? The captain isn't back yet either. He probably won't show up until just before we set sail. His family lives here in town, and he likes to sleep in his own bed. Even though the ship is big, there are only 29 crew members, so no one will find you in Jimmy's bunk." "Oh, thank you so much," Ramona said. "I'll tell Jimmy how kind you were to me. Maybe we can repay you somehow later." Carl liked the idea. He wondered if she was thinking of repaying him in the same way he had her. If so, he looked forward to that moment. It was strange that she was carrying several bags with her. He wondered why she hadn't left them in the car. He walked her back to Jimmy's bunk and went to play cards with the guys from his shift. Next chapter. Cliff Darden was driving fast, maybe too fast. The events of the last few hours had thrown him off balance. He was letting his heart rule his head. The meeting with the private investigator went as Cliff had expected. Badly. And then it got worse. Cliff went to the private investigator's office and got the documents he had expected. He had photos and videos of Ramona in action. The private investigator warned him not to look at them. He told Cliff that it would be better to just show them to her as proof that he knew what she was doing. Then he could use them as leverage to get her to stop. The old private investigator warned him that if he looked at the photos or videos, it would be even harder to repair his marriage. "Trust me, son. I've been in this business for a long time. I've seen relationships that were much worse than yours, and they not only recovered and survived, but they became stronger after it. Things may look bad now, but if you're willing to put in the effort, you'll make it work." Cliff didn't even tell the old man that he believed him. Regardless of what Ramona had done, he was willing to give her a second chance, but only one. That's why he needed the photos, videos, and file. He was going to meet with her when he got home, give her the file, and then lay out his conditions for them to stay together. She knew that the prenuptial agreement they had signed would give her virtually nothing if they divorced in less than 7 years, and only 2 had passed. The fact was that, even if Ramona had been cheating on him, having her in his life was much better than the alternative. He really had no choice. He loved her so much that the thought of living without her was agonizing. If that made him weak, so be it. Cliff headed home, wondering if there was really a reason she was cheating on him. Maybe it was gambling? Ramona clearly had no idea how much money they actually had. Oh, please let it be gambling. He could pay off her debts, send her to a therapist, and they could go back to their happy life. "Ramona," he called as he entered the house. He placed the folder on the kitchen table. On his way home, he had rehearsed what he was going to say to her. He was going to ask her to look at the photos and maybe the videos in the folder. He was going to tell her that he had already seen them and didn't have the heart to look at them again. If he saw them again, he wouldn't be able to stop himself from kicking her out of the house. It would be better that way. The only flaw in his plan was that Ramona wasn't home. He called her several times and walked around the house, but she wasn't there. He sat down at the kitchen table, placed the folder in front of him, and practiced looking angry. Half an hour later, he glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. Ramona had never been out this late before. He tried calling her, but the phone went straight to voicemail. In all their years of marriage, Ramona had never stayed out longer than 9 or 10 hours unless they were together. Something was wrong, and he knew it. He tried calling a few of her friends, but no one knew where she was. Cliff didn't know what to do. He sat down to watch TV and fell asleep in front of the screen. A few hours later, he woke up and went to the bedroom. She still hadn't returned, and it was almost 3 in the morning. And then he noticed it. The painting that concealed the safe in the wall was ajar. He walked over to the painting and noticed that the safe was unlocked. What's more, the safe was empty. The first thought that came to his mind was that someone had broken into the house or robbed them. Perhaps Ramona had been taken hostage. He went downstairs to his study. He opened a program on his computer that allowed him to view the recordings from the security cameras in their house. They usually use these recordings not only to determine who had broken into their home, but also to find out if contractors, workers, or anyone else who worked for them was stealing from them. To save space on the hard drive, the cameras were activated when motion was detected and only stored video for 2 weeks. Scrolling through the screen, he remembered his last movements in the house before leaving for work. The last thing he saw was Ramona leaving the house. She was alone and walking quickly. Scrolling further, he saw Ramona emptying the safe and taking a couple of bags full of her clothes and personal belongings. Tears streamed down Cliff's cheeks. Why did she leave him? Didn't she know he loved her? If she needed the money and the other junk she took, she could have taken it. She didn't have to leave. Maybe she thought she had no choice. Maybe she knew he knew about her affair. Maybe she thought he was going to leave her with nothing. Maybe that was how it was supposed to be. Cliff had to find her, but how? Then he remembered the tracking chip in her car. It was ridiculous how they had argued over that damn car. She wanted a Lexus, like her friends. Cliff refused and bought her a Cadillac XRS convertible. Cliff insisted on buying American cars. Ramona stamped her feet and refused to drive it. The beautiful car sat in their driveway for 3 weeks. Finally, one of Ramona's friends' Lexus broke down, and they had to take the Cadillac so they wouldn't be late for their hair appointments. She fell in love with the car, and all her friends envied her. A few months passed, and by the end of the year, all of Ramona's closest friends were driving Cadillacs. Cliff called the service department of the company that manufactured the chips for the locators. He told the woman on the phone that his wife had gone shopping and had literally lost the car. Ramona had left the keys in the car and called the company to have it opened so many times that losing the car or forgetting where she had parked it was not a big deal. The woman told Cliff where the car was, and he got into his Mustang and headed for the waterfront. Pulling into the nearest parking lot, Cliff saw Ramona's bright red Caddy. He ran to the car and realized it was over. The car doors were open. The keys were on the seat with an envelope. He opened the envelope and read the note. Cliff, don't miss me or be upset. I would like to sincerely tell you that I'm sorry or say a few kind words to make you feel better. But the truth is, in the end, it would only give you false hope and make everything even more difficult. It's not about you finding out that I cheated on you. So don't think that's the point. Don't torture yourself trying to figure out what you did wrong and why I stopped loving you. You need to understand that our entire relationship was a lie. I never stopped loving you because I never loved you. From the very first day we met, you were just a way for me to hide from the police and everyone who was looking for me. When we got together, I planned to stay with you long enough for the passion to fade. I thought it would last 6 months to a year at most. If it's any consolation, you were so loving and damn loyal that after the first year, I decided to stay longer to get more money out of you and leave with it. Unfortunately, you figured me out before I figured you out. And don't worry about me cheating on you, dear. We were never compatible in bed. You just love me too much. Not every woman wants a man to have slow, gentle sex with her. Some of us like it rough. It's just not your style. I'm sure that one day you'll find yourself a boring little woman, make her damn happy, and even have a house full of children. But I'm just not that kind of woman. If I regret anything, it's that I didn't know your poor heart would be broken. Believe me, Cliff, you needed someone to deceive you. You're too trusting and damn nice to survive without a few painful lessons from real life. My only regret is that I didn't take more of your damn money with me. The letter was signed Ramona. She later added, P.S. Ramona isn't even my real name. And while I won't miss you, I will miss this car. Cliff just collapsed and sat down next to the car, sobbing uncontrollably. He didn't know how long he sat there. It could have been minutes or hours. But then everything went wrong. The first sign that something was wrong was the wind picking up. Cliff didn't care. He didn't know what to do or where to go. He never thought his life with Ramona would end. He was ready to forgive her no matter what. The stupid thing was that even after reading the letter, he was still ready. Then the streetlights began to flicker. The wind was blowing so hard that signs were bending before his eyes, and anything that wasn't nailed down was flying through the street. Cliff looked around and saw her. It was a strange woman who was staring intently at him. She was saying something to him, but he couldn't hear her words because of the wind. As if sensing his thoughts, she shook her head from side to side and the wind died down. It must be a coincidence, Cliff thought. You're a man, the woman hissed. Cliff just nodded. Hardly, he said quietly. I don't understand, said the woman. I've never dealt with men. I'm supposed to improve the lives of those whose hearts are broken by betrayal. Oh, sometimes I do it to someone who's just a complete jerk for fun, But I don't understand. To feel that kind of pain, you have to be a woman. Men don't feel that kind of emotional pain unless their dog dies, their team loses the championship, or someone scratches their damn car. Sometimes you meet one who gets upset about his kids, but I've never seen one like that. She looked at him curiously. Tell me something. Tell me your story, she said. Cliff was too stunned to say or do anything. The woman made a gesture, and the hurricane-force wind grew even stronger, but only around him. The wind lifted Cliff, who was screaming and flailing into the air, and carried him over the river. Before he could catch his breath, he fell into the icy water. As he sank into the water, Cliff realized that he simply didn't care. Without Ramona, there was no point in living. He felt someone grab him underwater and didn't even try to resist. Noah Brina grabbed Cliff and placed her icy hands on his head. She wanted his memories, and she erased them, taking them with her. She erased all memories of Ramona, the bitch. When Cliff woke up, he wouldn't remember anything about Ramona. Noah Brina sensed someone's presence above her. Right behind the bank, a police car was patrolling the street. She knocked down a sign right in front of the car, forcing it to pull over onto the beach to get around the sign. The policewoman behind the wheel got out of the car and saw Cliff struggling and trying not to drown in the icy water. Noah Brina smiled as she watched the woman enter the water and pull the man out. He would be fine now, but she had things to do. No sooner had she begun searching for her target than Noah Brina was suddenly pulled down the river. As she surfaced, she noticed that the pull was stronger this time. It was him, the same insect that had bothered her earlier. Dressed in black leather, John Lake once again held the ancient Ojibwe staff of power in his hands. This time, he called her two names. The call was stronger. He still couldn't control her, but he was getting smarter. He didn't understand that she now had two spirits. One was the wind of the Great Lakes, and the other was human. The great tragedy and abuse of power that had brought incredible grief had led to the merging of her spirit with the former owner of this body. Now Noibrina had to correct the mistakes her body had made every year. The last thing this little shaman tried to save was just a trifle. She didn't hit Jimmy for no reason, but because he insulted her and called her names. Now the little shaman threatened Noibrina's business. If he ever learned her third name, he might not be able to banish her forever. But he could send her to bed until next year. Noibrina had no idea what would happen in that case. It will be your fault, she warned him. November Witch, said John Lake, holding his staff in front of him. Known in the language of my people as Gashka Dino Hysis, I banish you to the lakes of your sisters forever. From now on, you can only exist in Erie, Ontario, Michigan, Huron, and Lake Superior. Go on your way and never leave these waters again. Feel my power. John swung his war club. He felt tremendous power emanating from his ancestral mace. Nubrina felt a slight tingling sensation. It angered her. She made a gesture, and John Lake rose into the air not far from where she hovered. Feel the wall, she hissed. A hurricane-force wind blew John Lake back at nearly 90 miles per hour. Noah Brina saved John's life at the last moment by turning him in the air so that he did not hit his head against the wall. He broke 7 ribs, both legs, and his left arm. When he fell unconscious to the ground, Noah Brina gently lowered herself onto the grass beside him. She didn't know why she had spared him. There was something special about him. She made another gesture, and he woke up from a light, cool breeze. He looked at her in horror. I left your right hand so you can write me a thank you note, she grinned. Next time you try to control me, you'll die. But I'm left-handed, John growled. Sue me, said Nobrina, and walked toward the river. Her mind was already preoccupied with finding someone. Next chapter. Stay or go? Janet Charles wondered as she looked at the sleeping man in the hospital bed next to her. She sat on a chair next to his bed, watching for signs that he might wake up. He was handsome, but he didn't seem to understand what was going on. Just 2 hours ago, she had pulled him out of the river. He was shivering from the cold and didn't understand how he had ended up in the water. He kept repeating that he had gone looking for something, and then everything disappeared. He couldn't remember what he was looking for. The detective in charge of the case kept her informed of all the developments. Detective Bernie Gork was new to her precinct, but not to the police force. He was a good cop and gave her all the information he had about the man she had pulled out of the river. Janet absorbed everything. Although she wasn't involved in the investigation, the captain didn't seem to mind her spending time at the hospital until the case was closed. There were too many strange things about this case. Janet's problem was that the more information she got about the alleged victim, the more she wanted to know. She would spend hours just looking at him and thinking while he slept. Gorky's report filled in most of the gaps, but one or two questions remained. His name was Clifford Darden. He appeared to be married, but when they ran background checks on him and his wife as part of their investigation, they discovered some interesting facts. He didn't say anything interesting about himself. He was some kind of computer engineer. He seemed to be very good at his job and had to prove it. He wasn't like Bill Gates, but losing $1 or $2 wouldn't send him to the poorhouse. He had no criminal record, and apart from a few speeding tickets, he had never been in trouble with the law. He even paid those fines on time and was very polite to the officers who issued them. Janet saw his car at the scene of the accident. Cars of that type were probably sold with a commitment to pay 1 or 3 fines. The contract you sign when you buy a car probably says that you will not demand reimbursement from Ford Motor Company for fines incurred while driving the car. In any case, when they checked his wife, all the alarm bells went off. The first thing that aroused suspicion was that they got married in Las Vegas. Anyone can get married there, so why would a rich guy want to get married in Vegas? Then they discovered that Ramona Cruz did not exist. The only Ramona Cruz they found had died in 1980. The age matched, but that was all. Apparently, she had taken someone else's name. After checking the couple's financial documents, they found something interesting. The wife had recently withdrawn all the money from the couple's bank accounts. In fact, she did it yesterday. When they checked the bank documents, they got lucky. The bank used a fingerprint system to access the safe deposit boxes. They checked the fingerprints and got a match. Ramona Cruz was an alias. The woman's real name was Margaret Ann McGillicuddy. She had several arrest warrants out against her over the past 10 years. She disappeared almost 2 years ago after a major insurance fraud in Chicago. Everyone involved was caught and served their time, but Margaret was never caught. Now we know why. She was hiding in plain sight as the wife of a respectable citizen. When they threw away his cell phone, they discovered that he had been in the area looking for his wife's car. They searched her car as well, and one of the fingerprints taken from the car clearly confirmed that Margaret Ann McGillicuddy was Ramona Cruz, aka Ramona Darden. Even worse was the note she left for the poor bastard. When Janet read the note, her heart sank too. What kind of bitch would leave a note like that to a man who loved her so much? Even the tough, battle-hardened men working on the case felt sorry for the guy. Most of them couldn't look at him. It was like interrogating someone with a terrible disease. It wasn't the disease itself or even the fact that he had it that was scary. What was scary was that you could have been in his place. Police officers often have failed relationships and broken marriages. Any one of these guys could have been in Darden's shoes. Janet was no stranger to failed relationships herself. Her last boyfriend was a little rougher than the others. The fact that she was a cop clearly threatened his macho ego, so they had several arguments and fights. The last one ended in a brawl. She had to put a gun to his face to make him back off. That was almost a year ago. He never came back for his things. 6 months later, she gave all his clothes and personal belongings to the Salvation Army. Since then, she hadn't been on a single date and hadn't practiced celibacy. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she couldn't understand why, at 32, she was still single. She was attractive. All her friends were either already married or divorced and getting ready to remarry. Some of them already had children. Janet wasn't even particularly picky about men. She just wanted a man who would love her and treat her well. She didn't need Brad Pitt. She wanted a normal, everyday man who wanted to be with her. "Where am I?" asked the man lying on the bed next to her. His voice snapped Janet out of her reverie. "Mr. Darden, you're in the hospital," she replied. "Do you remember how you got here?" "Yes," he said. "I was in the river, and a very beautiful policewoman pulled me out." Janet's face turned bright red. "It was you, wasn't it?" he asked. She nodded and tried hard not to smile. "What else do you remember?" he asked. "Do you remember how you ended up in the water and why? And why were you on the riverbank in the first place?" "There was a hurricane-force wind," he said. "I think I lost my balance and was blown into the river. But I have no idea why I was there. Wait, I was looking for something or someone, but I don't remember what." "We think you were looking for your wife. From what we can gather, she left you and took a lot of money with her. We read the note she left for you. I hope you don't mind me saying, but she was a bitch." "You deserve much better than her," Janet said. Cliff Darden looked at her curiously. Officer, I'm not married. I don't have a wife, he said. Maybe you're working on too many cases and you've got me mixed up with someone else? Later that day, Darden was examined by doctors and psychologists. It was determined that he was suffering from very mild hypothermia. This was probably caused by exposure to extreme cold when he fell into the river. Otherwise, he was physically and mentally fine. The problem was that he simply could not remember anything about his wife or their life together, although he was, in fact, married. The ceremony and marriage could easily have been annulled by simply going to a judge in any state and requesting an annulment. The marriage had been a sham from the start. His wife had lied about everything on the marriage certificate. In addition, she had married him under false pretenses. When she showed him copies of the documents, he could hardly remember any of it. Janet began to sit by his bedside constantly. Since Janet enjoyed being with him, and Cliff had no relatives in the area, she began to help him, for example, by contacting his lawyers. The psychologist also decided that she should be the one to tell him the truth about his wife and help him decide what to do about her and his legal status. He thought about moving to a private room, but couldn't find a reason to do so. The large man in the next bed was in an induced coma. He had been found in the same neighborhood as Cliff, at almost the same time. He was a large Native American man with almost every bone in his body broken. The next day, they were going to try to bring him out of the coma if he didn't regain consciousness on his own. Next chapter. Ramona woke up and looked out the window of the small room on the ship. She heard footsteps. Then, the door opened. "Jimmy," she called cautiously. "No, it's Carl," he replied. "We need to talk. It's 5 in the morning and I have news for you. We have to get you off this ship. The captain is back, and we're leaving in less than half an hour." "Where's Jimmy?" she asked. "Jimmy's dead," he said. "The police arrived about 2 hours ago. I knew you had nothing to do with it because you were sleeping here when it happened. They didn't ask you any questions, so I didn't tell them anything. We have to get you out of here." "But I can't," she began. She gently took Carl's hand. "They're not looking for me because of Jimmy, but there are people looking for me. Jimmy was going to put me on a boat to Wisconsin so I could start a new life. My husband is rich, and his people are looking for me everywhere. If they find me and take me back to him, it will be terrible. The last time I tried to escape from him, I couldn't leave the house for almost a month. Please, just hide me." Carl listened to Ramona's story. He also looked at her. Carl was older and smarter than Jimmy. He didn't feel the slightest sympathy for Ramona. Moreover, looking at her, he could tell she was lying. Next chapter. John Lake woke up in the hospital. Most of his body was bandaged or covered with band-aids. Everything he could think of hurt. He felt like he had been hit by a truck. He realized he should be grateful to be alive. The day before, he had talked to his great-grandfather. The old man had given him a powerful totem. A war club, he said, possessed enormous power, and he used both names of the elemental of the autumn storms. He used both the Ojibwe name and the name given to it by the sailors of the Great Lakes. It should have worked, but it didn't. The day passed and Halloween arrived. Tonight, the veil between all dimensions would be thinner than ever, and all spirits, especially those as ancient and powerful as the element of wind, would be at the peak of their powers. He had missed his chance. His best chance to stop Neubrunn from doing what she wanted was gone. He could feel in his bones that the man she had killed when they first met was just an appetizer for her. She wanted to kill someone else, and there was nothing he could do about it. Now he realized he wasn't a real shaman. Sure, he drove his Mustang in black leather, but when it came down to it, November chewed him up and spat him out. She did the same thing her sister, Gitchy Noon, did to the ships, like in the song about the shipwreck. That good and faithful ship began to gnaw on bones when the November storms came early. Only luck and chance saved him. In the Detroit River, he met a witch. Her power, though great, was not as great as it was on one of the Great Lakes. She would have been especially powerful on Lake Superior. It was another line from the song, and also one of his people's legends about the Great Lakes. The legend of the Great Lake, they call Gitche Gummy, lives among the Chippewa and below. Superior, they say, never gives up its dead when the November storms come early. Both the song and the legend of his people said almost the same thing. If November pursued someone or something and caught up with them on Lake Superior, it meant death. It was quite possible that there would be many. John knew that the only reason he was still alive was the capricious nature of the witch. When they first met, she had simply smiled and left him a warning. This time, she could kill him. She had even joked that she would leave him with only one hand. John decided to simply pray for the souls of all the people in the lakes, because there was nothing he could do to save them. However, something did not add up. November Witch. That's what they called the early fall storms on the Great Lakes. When and how did she get her body? Why did she need it? John's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of heels clicking on the hospital floor. A woman walked past his bed and approached the man lying next to him. She was beautiful. He was lucky. John had had several relationships, but no woman had ever loved him the way this one obviously loved the guy in the next bed. He tried to fall asleep but ended up listening to their conversation. He knew he shouldn't, but damn it, he didn't have a TV or a radio. They were talking about a woman who had hurt a man. He seemed to be crazy about her, and she had broken his heart. The man kept saying he didn't remember her. When the woman and the doctor showed him a photo of her, there was no reaction on his face. He simply didn't remember her. Even under hypnosis, he couldn't remember anything about her or ever having seen her. However, under hypnosis, he described another woman. He described her as thin, with disheveled hair falling down her chest. He also claimed that she was floating in the wind and blew him into the river. When the psychologist left, John saw a woman who must have been a police officer covering a man with a blanket to put him to sleep. She shook her head sadly and whispered, "If only..." Straightening up, she met John's gaze and realized that he had been awake and watching her for some time. Before she could think of what to say in her near panic, John reassured her. "Don't worry," he said. "I was there. I won't say a word." The woman nodded her thanks and left the room. John noticed that she came back to check on the man, even though she was off duty and out of uniform. Next chapter. Ramona laid her head on the dirty mattress on Jimmy's small bed. At the speed the ship was going, she would probably die before they reached Wisconsin. It was Halloween night, and the crew was celebrating. For the captain and officers, that meant drinking a glass of rum and telling scary stories about strange things that happened on the lakes. Several hours passed before Ramona learned the truth. Carl was taking money from his comrades for entertaining her. He was also profiting from her. At $50 a head, Carl had already made over $1,000 off her. At that rate, he would be much richer by the time they reached Wisconsin. "Do you know what diseases I'm risking?" he asked. "It's just not worth the risk. Who needs it?" The thought that had been haunting her since she left home yesterday came back to her. "I should have stayed with Cliff. That man loved me. We could have made it work." She pushed the thought away. Her whole life had been like that. Now it was too late to change anything. Next chapter. At midnight, November appeared over the waters of Upper Lake. She reached out to him in her mind, and the wind touched all the boats on the lake. The one she was looking for would be here soon. She felt a large boat racing across the water at nearly 15 knots. It was just passing Black Bay on the American side of the lake. It had not yet entered the lake itself, but she could already feel the evil and pain that her target was causing. At the mere thought of it, the wind on the lake grew stronger and colder. The waves on the lake grew higher due to the strengthening wind. Noya Brina smiled. From the way the wind caressed the large cargo ship, she could sense that there were people on board. Whether the ship would survive the night and whether any of its crew would perish was not in her power. This time, the decision was up to them. On board the Maitland, the radio operator contacted the National Weather Service. His name was Paul Pittman, and he was worried. The waves had risen a little, the noise was a little louder than he had expected, and he had a bad feeling. According to the weather forecast, warmer weather and calmer waves were expected. He radioed his friend on a ship in another part of the upper lake. The lake was huge, so big that sometimes the rain fell on only part of its surface. After talking to his friend, his fears intensified. The temperature and wave height on the other ship matched the forecast for that night exactly. Of course, he couldn't say anything to the captain or the other officers. They would have laughed at him, and he would have been the butt of jokes for years to come. An hour later, Pittman called the captain. He needn't have worried. The temperature had dropped so low and the wind had picked up so much that the ship was moving through the water at half the speed its engines were designed for. Worse, the waves had nearly doubled in size since they had entered the high point. The ship couldn't handle them, but it was still terrifying to sail. Pittman looked up when one of the senior deckhands asked permission to come up to the bridge. It was Isaac Turner. He had served on the Maitland for over 10 years. His face was green. "Everything will be fine, Ike," said Captain Gordon Song. He was Canadian and had worked on the Great Lakes for almost 40 years. "I've seen hundreds of storms like this, and so has the Maitland. I know what you're thinking, but this is only temporary. Go back to your bunk. Have a drink and it'll be over before you know it." Ike saluted and nodded. He knew the captain was lying, but he was a good sailor and always obeyed orders or pretended to. He also understood that the captain wasn't lying because he was dishonest. He was lying because he needed the crew to be as confident as possible that the ship and its captain would survive. If the captain looked scared, what would happen to the rest of the crew? It was a necessary lie. In medicine, it's called benevolent deception. If a doctor tells you that an injection will be very painful, most people would never allow themselves to have it. Similarly, if the captain told the crew that he was afraid, or started ranting about old superstitions, who knows what might happen? But in all his years on the lakes and on this ship, Isaac had never seen waves like these. It was like riding a damn roller coaster. After all, a ship of this size was supposed to cut through the waves, not ride them and slide down them. Everywhere he looked, everyone, like the captain, understood that the November Witch had come for her prey. Ike saw men who normally stood on deck at night watching the water even in the roughest weather, now cowering in their cabins with frightened expressions on their faces. Ike knew that by morning, this crew would either be telling this story to their grandchildren or become part of a story that someone else would tell theirs. When Ike cautiously stepped out of the bridge, a strong gust of wind pinned him against the bulkhead. He held on for a split second, but then he was knocked off his feet. Suddenly, an even stronger gust lifted the large man and held him in the air. He landed carefully on his feet and looked around. "This is damn strange," he thought. Jimmy would have loved to know about this. Of course, he would never have believed it. "Jimmy didn't believe in anything, Isaac." "That was his damn problem," came a voice from behind Ike. He turned and looked. There, at the railing where he and Jimmy had watched their children waving at them in Detroit, stood a slender woman. "Come talk to me, Isaac," she said quietly. It seemed to Ike that she was oblivious to the commotion on the ship. She opened her arms, her long hair blowing in the wind. She smiled as if she had nothing to fear. At that moment, the ship began to crash against a giant wave. Isaac couldn't tell if it was raining or if the wind was just blowing water across the deck. Either way, the rain almost froze him when it touched his skin. Why wasn't the woman cold? She was wearing almost nothing. And why wasn't she afraid? Ike was scared to death, and this was his ship. Why wasn't this woman afraid? And then he understood. Recognition brought realization. Fear gave way to humility. Ike approached the railing next to her. "You're a GIR, right?" he asked. "I'm afraid so," Neubrina smiled. You, he began. "Yes, Ike," she smiled. "I arrived here earlier this year." "You know what that means, Prouda. But it's not necessarily a bad thing." Ike sighed heavily and looked at the woman standing next to him. Something inside him told him that the thought that had crossed his mind would be unwelcome. "Even if you throw me overboard, Isaac, I won't die. I can't die, as you call it, because I'm not alive. And I'll be angry when I get up. I hoped you were smarter than that." "What do I have to do?" asked Ike. "Follow your captain," she grinned. Ike slowly crossed the deck and returned to the bridge. This time he burst into the room with an expression of extreme fear on his face. All the officers in the room turned and looked at him. "What are you doing, Ike?" Pittman shouted. "You should know better." "What's going on, Ike?" Captain Song asked. Ike, pale as a sheet, replied, "Captain, it's the witch." "Ike, every self-respecting sailor knows what these storms are called and why they happen," Captain Song said. "Pull yourself together before I send you to the brig." "No, Captain," cried Ike. "It's really her, and she wants to see you. She's here on this cursed ship, and if you don't talk to her, none of us will live to see morning." "What the hell are you talking about?" asked the captain. "The November Witch isn't a person. It's the name of the storm. Tell that to the woman standing at the railing in a hurricane-force wind, as if she's out for a stroll on a sunny day in Florida," shouted Ike. "If you think I'm wrong, just go out on deck. You can always send me to the brig or fire me. Just get your ass out there and talk to her." Then, realizing he might have gone too far, Ike added, "Sir," and quickly saluted. Captain Song walked over to a cabinet on the back wall of the bridge. He opened the cabinet and handed out rifles to each of his officers. One of them, Tom Dooley, a big brawler, refused to take a rifle. "We're talking about a girl, aren't we?" he asked. Isaac nodded. "I don't need a gun," Dooley said. "If I do, I'll just throw it overboard." The captain, accompanied by 7 men armed with rifles, and the large man Tom Dooley, left the bridge. Ike took advantage of this opportunity to get out of the way. "What are you doing on my ship?" Captain Song asked. The woman who had been standing at the railing when Ike spoke turned and looked at the captain. The expression on her face indicated that she was amused. "What is your ship doing in my sister's waters?" she replied sharply. "Who are you?" barked the captain. "What game are you playing?" "You know who I am, Captain Song. Don't play games with me. Your boat might get a little wet," she smiled. "Mr. Dooley, lock this woman in the cabin until we find out what's going on," the captain shouted. Tom Dooley headed toward the woman. When he raised his fist to grab her, she raised one eyebrow and lifted one slender finger. A gust of wind lifted the large man and lifted him into the air. He hung there, kicking and screaming, while the other men looked on in shock. "You don't need people like that on your ship, Captain," said Neubrina. As if in passing, she made a gesture, and Dooley flew out of the ship and landed almost 100 meters away in the icy water. Not even a cry was heard to mark his departure. The other men, without waiting for the captain's response, raised their guns and fired. 7 bullets hit November in different parts of her body. The men stared at her, waiting, or rather hoping, that she would fall. There was a long silence. She did not fall or even stagger, but she looked at the captain and spoke again. "I tried to do this the easy way," she said, "but it seems you wouldn't let me. You came into my sister's waters and we took you in as guests. But that will not happen again. By the end of this night, Captain, I will have my way one way or another. And now we will do things my way." The woman raised her arms and flew into the air on another gust of wind, which, the captain suddenly realized, she was controlling. Now he understood that she was the cause of the huge waves and the low temperature. When he realized his mistake, the waves grew even larger. They turned into mountains rising from the lake. Looking at the woman hovering in front of him, he realized that his ship would not withstand such huge waves. A wave almost 15 meters high was rushing straight at him. This wave meant the end of the ship and all the people on board. "What do you want?" the captain asked quietly. The wave immediately subsided, and the lake became calm. Where seconds ago the water had been raging at near-Arctic temperatures, now it was quiet, and a light, cool breeze was blowing. "I see that whore," said November. "What whore?" asked the captain. "There are no women on my ship, no offense." "I'm not offended," she replied. "Gather the entire crew on deck." Captain Song ordered his officers to go around the ship and gather the crew. There was no need to explain what was happening. Most of them already knew, thanks to Ake. As they approached, there was whispering and murmuring. More than one man pressed his hand to his mouth at the mention of the witch. Most of the brave ones pressed themselves against the bulkheads, as far away from November as possible. "Gentlemen," she addressed them all, "bear with me, this is all new to me. I'm not used to dealing with people. Usually I just sink your little boats and sink you. Anyway, tonight you can all leave here alive and well. I'm not going to hurt any of you unless I have to. I only want this woman. But listen to me. Either she leaves, or you all leave." "There are no women on my ship," growled the captain. "I'll give you 10 minutes to decide," said Neubrina. The captain gathered his crew. There was talking and shouting. "I'm not going to die and leave my family without a breadwinner because of some whore," shouted one of the crew members. "What whore?" asked the captain. "The one who's been entertaining everyone below deck since we left Michigan," replied another crew member. "Carl is taking money from us for her services," said another. "We can't in good conscience hand over an innocent woman to that creature," said the captain. "It would be unchristian." "That bitch isn't innocent," one of the crew members replied sharply. "Innocent women don't do things like that. Besides, Captain, the witch isn't a Christian." "I'm bored." Neubrina joined the conversation. As soon as she uttered these words, the wind picked up and the waves instantly grew higher. Before the captain could respond, 3 men ran below deck and returned a few minutes later, dragging Ramona with them. "No," shouted the captain, "you can't take her away. I won't be a part of this." "Madam Miss Witch," one of the sailors replied politely. "Do you want the captain to leave too?" Neubrina seemed to ponder his question for a moment. The captain came to his senses and asked Noyabrina if she wanted to put the woman in the boat. Noyabrina looked at the woman closely and intently. "I'll take her as she is," said Noyabrina. Before Ramona could object, a gust of wind blew her off the deck into the air. November rose to follow her. On this night and until the end of the season, no harm will come to this ship anywhere on the lakes. Moreover, if any member of the crew falls overboard, even in the roughest waters, they will be brought ashore alive and unharmed, she said in a voice like a gust of wind. Then she disappeared, leaving the crew wondering if they had dreamed it all. Ramona went down into the water, followed by another woman. She tried to swim, but the cold numbed her senses. She took one breath and held it as long as she could, then plunged into the water. She felt hands touch her and, in shock, opened her eyes to see another woman next to her. She had no hope of seducing this woman. The woman grabbed her head violently, and memories flashed before Ramona's eyes. She saw all the time she had spent deceiving people and taking their property. She remembered every lie she had ever told and every person she had ever deceived or robbed. The most painful memories were the most recent ones. When she saw herself with Cliff, she could almost feel his love for her, like a physical presence. She couldn't believe she had squandered such a treasure. In that moment, she realized what a despicable creature she was and how much better the world would be without her. Then a thought came to Ramona. It was as if someone else was speaking to her. She opened her eyes and saw another woman. 36 years ago, I was just like you. That's why I became what I am now. To rid the world of creatures like you. Ramona nodded, feeling pain and shame for how she had wasted her life. And she died. The icy water of the lake rushed into her lungs. Next chapter. On board the Maitland, Paul Pittman responded to the radio message. Then he switched to his computer and sent the photos by email. He was ready for this. Immediately after the women left the ship, the captain made them swear to keep what had happened a secret. He also informed them that surveillance cameras were installed at the dock, as usual. He was confident that the authorities would eventually realize that a woman had been on board his ship. He collected several photos and videos taken by his crew while the woman was on board. It was these that Paul sent to the Coast Guard and the Detroit police. He told them that the woman had been found on board the Maitland shortly after they left port. She had drunk a little too much with the crew and became heavily intoxicated during a Halloween party. He sent photos and videos proving that her actions were entirely voluntary. Unfortunately, while intoxicated, she fell overboard. At that point, she was still missing. They called the Coast Guard and a boat was sent out to search for her body. It was a terrible accident, but nothing more than that. Since the captain did not know that there was a woman on board his vessel, he was only warned to be more careful with his boat. It also turned out that Tom Dooley had gone missing during the storm and heavy waves. Tom's body was never found. It was very strange, but the Coast Guard searched the boat from bow to stern several times. Divers and search parties worked for over 2 weeks, but the body was never found. The police closed the case, and the Coast Guard, having exhausted all possibilities of finding the bodies, also closed the case. For several weeks, all ships in the Great Lakes area were put on alert. But the alarm proved to be false. There were no storms that November. They had all hit one small region much earlier than usual. And everyone knew the bodies would never be found. Gitchy Noon never parted with the dead when November came early. Sailors on the lakes always feared the November storms. Next chapter. 3 days after Halloween, Cliff Darden got into his Mustang and drove home. He knew it was his home again, not the empty house it had been when he first left the hospital. Sometimes strange things happen, and this was one of the good ones. Although it had only been a few days, Cliff knew it was the right decision. It was what he needed to fill the void in his life. When he opened the door, Janet rushed out to meet him. She hugged him and clung to him as if her life depended on it. Maybe her life didn't depend on it, but her heart did. Their relationship was just beginning, but Janet was sure that Cliff was the man who would give her everything she wanted. A home. A man who would love her and treat her well. Accept her love. And maybe someday they would have children. It was what Janet wanted more than anything else in the world. Cliff kissed her and felt good. He felt very good. The thought flashed through his mind that he had done this with someone else before, but this time it was different. Almost 2 months later, John Lake was discharged from the hospital. He could barely move. The doctors advised him to take it easy, but he was confident he would recover. He still had several weeks of physical therapy ahead of him, but for the past 7 weeks he had been working tirelessly toward recovery, thinking of only one thing. The day after Halloween, when the investigation into his neighbor's mysterious and forgetful wife was closed, and the policewoman who had been working on the case somehow became his girlfriend, another strange event occurred. Just a few hours after Cliff and Janet left the hospital and John was in the throes of another wave of pain as his bones began to heal, he had a visitor. At first he thought he was dreaming. It was a beautiful blonde woman. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she whispered. "I'm sorry I hurt you, but you made me angry. When you get out of here, if you want to see me again, come to the water and call me." She must have mistaken him for someone else. No woman had ever insulted John before. Maybe it was a dream. John rushed to his Mustang. He had to pay for parking with his credit card because the car had been running for a long time. He didn't expect it to start, but the pony car started on the first try, the powerful engine not even squeaking. John didn't know where to go. He just got behind the wheel. He drove north to where his people still lived in small settlements. These weren't reservations, but small towns where people still lived according to old traditions. Passing one of the towns, he waved to a few people he had known since childhood. "Hello, John. Are you back?" several people asked warmly. "I don't know," he replied. "Maybe." John got out of the car and sat down on a bench overlooking the open water. "November," he said. His voice was so quiet that it was barely audible. He laughed to himself. "I must be going crazy to even think about that." As he laughed, the water bubbled, and a figure emerged from it. "You're late," she said. "I just got out of the hospital today," he replied. "Do you like my new look?" she asked. He nodded and hugged her. "Don't make me angry," she smiled. The end. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.